So can everybody see a screen here that says top 5 strategies?
Just fine.
Excellent. Okay, so without any ado, there's no mystery here. Here are the top 5, but you're going to see that they're not exactly a linear checklist that you go through, and if you achieve these top 5, then you will excel in federal sales. But I'm going to talk throughout the next 20 minutes or so about influence on process, and it's actually multiple processes, and I'll try to articulate those for you. We're going to explain how you can communicate more effectively with your government audience, no matter where that audience sits, whether it's in an agency or in Congress. I want you to have a better appreciation for the investment that you might make in the effort to participate in this process, with a better use of your imagination about what some of the outcomes could be, specifically in funding and policy that influences funding. A lot of people chase contracts, and I'm going to talk about that. You want to be focused on funding and how to participate more fully in the funding process. Influence on relationships. You have to know certain people, or you have to be able to connect to certain people. And sometimes we connect with the people that are easiest to reach, or the people that are closest to us, or the people that somebody knows, the famous or infamous, I know a guy, or some mentor tells you to go visit somebody, and then you wind up visiting them at the wrong time and place. And so you miss your opportunity to really influence a relationship because you weren't connected properly at the right place and time. And then I want to differentiate between experience and expertise. I see this confused all the time, and it's particularly prevalent in the defense world. There are a lot of prior military people who work in the defense industry, and they tend to say things like, I've been in this business for 30 years, and 20 of that was in uniform. Or I've been doing something in defense, working with tanks, working with ships, working around aircraft for 25 years. And again, 10 of that or 15 of that might have been in uniform. And so they understand the uniformed side of a defense community, but they don't necessarily understand the business aspects as well. And so I like to say, you need to be able to demonstrate expertise to your government buyer, whether that's an agency person or a congressional staff member. When you can distinguish between your expertise and your years of experience, you'll find that people on the buying side will refer to you as a credible resource. They'll actually reach out and start asking you questions. Brittany, I see people trying to come in if you want to continue to let them in. This is just a review here, looking at the road to progress, the road to change. I'm highlighting the fact here that there are multiple years of effort that unfold over the course of time. The budget at the agency level takes a couple of years to put together, and that budget doesn't even leave the Department of Defense, for example, until it's been worked on for up to 2 years. We're coming up on a point here where we are in fiscal year 23. The fiscal year 24 budget preparation is complete within the Pentagon and at the agency level. It's about to go over to the, or it has recently gone over to the Office of Management and Budget. That happens over the Christmas time. And then it will go to Congress. It's due to Congress by the first Monday in February. Sometimes it's on time. Oftentimes it's a little bit late. But that budget that's been a couple of years in development is now ready to go to Congress for fiscal year 24. It's a political document. It will land in Congress with some degree of amusement on the part of members of Congress. They'll say, thank you very much. Now we'll have our piece of interaction with this. And they'll spend 9 or 12 months conducting hearings, meeting with industry, dissecting that request, and then formulating the budget into pieces of legislation that take the form of authorizations or appropriations. Only then, after the legislation has been passed, do the funds actually go over to the executive branch agencies. And then they're available for the acquisition and contracting phases. And we'll highlight these particular phases here in a separate slide, but just a quick review. There's budget preparation, there's legislation, there's acquisition, and then there's contracting. They all happen in series, and this road to change is just showing you that it happens in a serial fashion, and it takes a few years for that to unfold. I'd like you to think about the processes from left to right here. I use the term left side and right side. On the left side of the world is what I refer to as government relations. So that's interactions with the agency. It's also interactions with Congress. It's trying to formulate some positioning in the budget, shaping a budget for preparation and delivery to Congress, shaping what may actually wind up in the legislation, the authorization or the appropriation. That's government relations. Part of that is lobbying. We'll differentiate where lobbying happens. If you're communicating directly with Congress, that is lobbying. If you are communicating with an agency at more senior levels, that is called lobbying. So the reference point is if you're a 1-star equivalent in uniform, 07 or above, or if you're an equivalent senior civilian on the Schedule C pay scale in the SES world, that could also be lobbying. Below that level, it's not lobbying, it's business development. And it gets skewed and interpreted in different ways, but the Supreme Court is crystal clear on what is lobbying. So you want to be mindful of that. On the right-hand side of this slide is where people tend to sit and participate. And this is really what GovCon is, in my view. This is the acquisition and contracting side. So the budget was prepared, funding has been established, and it's in place. And now we're ready to go out and buy something, and we're going to put out RFIs and RFPs so that people can participate potentially in a competition and get funds on contract. If you read the media, either through whatever your digital source is or media resource, you'll see the term GovCon used ubiquitously, and it covers in the public square. It covers this entire spectrum, but in reality, GovCon is really this very far right side, the acquisition and contracting phase. I think too many people spend far too much time on the far right side. And if they spent time on the left side, they could be influencing things long before the acquisition ever took place, such that they are in position to receive funding because they participated in the process. They talked about an idea or a concept. They helped shape policy that was going to be more favorable to them, and they can be in a better position to take advantage in the acquisition and contracting phase. If you were to stack that road to change year over year, this is meant to show that it's a perpetual process that's in constant motion. So although the FY24 budget is about to go to Congress, FY25 is in development within the agencies already. So just a refresher, we're executing on fiscal year 23. We were late getting that. We got it around Christmas time. So we were on a continuing resolution for a period of 22 spending, but we were in 23. Now 24 is going to the Hill and 25 is in development. So you can see this perpetual year over year issue. But what it means is that there are near, mid, and long-term opportunities that you can be working on at any one time. But you have to know where you are in the process, and you have to know what that audience on the other side can do for you when you go see them. So if you were to go see somebody now in the executive branch about an FY24 issue, they can't really help you because the budget is out of their hands right now. It's going into Congress's hands. And until they see what Congress does to it, they don't really know what the outcome is. They have some general ideas, but they can't speak with specificity and certainty. They may try to, and you may hear that with your happy ears that they tell you something, but it may not come to pass. So you have to know where you are, where the budget is in its development process, and you have to know what should that person on the other side, whether they're in an agency or in Congress, what should they know at a particular place and time? When you can master this part of the process, you'll find that you can be highly efficient with who you're speaking with and what you're talking about. And of course, throughout the process, you're trying to develop support. I identify 7 specific stages of support that any company needs to be working on. A government buyer needs to be aware that you even exist, that you have some product or solution. You need to be able to generate interest on the part of the government customer. Why should they see that you have something that's worth their consideration? You can do different things to help promote that interest, meeting with people, demonstrating your capability, writing about it, having other people write about it, sort of a third-party advocacy. You can participate in industry panels or potentially speak at industry events where people might come to understand what it is that you have. You want that government customer to want to explore what it is that you have. So somehow you're trying to break through, and you're either going to break through because you can beat somebody on capability, or you can beat them on cost, or you can beat them on just your capacity to be able to deliver something in a more timely and effective manner. You want that government customer to want to pursue you. And so think of the difference here. We talk about capture and pursuit in the contracting phase where we're chasing down a contract. You want that government customer to be pursuing you because they recognize that you have something different. Whatever your product or solution is, you want to be thinking about differentiation along the way. You're either trying to unseat an incumbent, or you're trying to introduce something new that they should care about. That government customer is going to want to evaluate not only your product or solution, but your ability to deliver that. Do you have the capacity to deliver what you say you can deliver on time and on budget? A lot of companies are so focused on getting the meeting and showing off whatever they've created in their R&D lab that they miss the whole transition to a manufacturing capability, or how this might transition into a line of the budget as part of a program of record. That government customer is going to want to validate what it is that you've said, what it is you put forth. They might want to test some article that you have, whether it's a developmental item or a service. They need to be able to examine it, and they're going to want to examine your capability and your capacity. Can you do what you say you can do? Only then are you really able to get support from people that matter. And there's different people that matter across these industry, agency, and Congress. Those different people, some of them are decision makers, some of them are decision enablers. So they're the person whispering in the ear of the decider, or they might just be influencers, people who are recognized as expert, to whom people may turn for technical evaluation, or they might defer to that person's expertise in a committee setting. A lot of acquisition decisions are made by committee, not one person. But if you don't have these things in line, you're not really able to have a conversation about support. Ultimately, a few things need to be in place for this federal sale. There's got to be a legitimate need that generally comes from the field. So it could be in defense, it could be operators are struggling with a particular challenge in the field. So there has to be a need. That need has to be evaluated at a headquarters level by somebody who has resourcing responsibility, and they validate a requirement. When a requirement is validated, it can then be considered to be put in the budget. And those issues are typically ranked by some sort of priority order. Many companies who participate in this process hear the words, you just missed the cut, or you're number 3 on the list. There's all sorts of ways that the validated requirement can be measured and racked and stacked. But the key is you have to try to break through. Whoop, we went backwards there. Let me see if I can fix that. And the last piece that has to be in place is funding. And funding was what this budgeting process was all about. you can have the greatest product since sliced bread, but if there's no money behind it, there's nothing there. There can be RFIs out on the street that have no money behind them. Some people miss that completely. There's a saying in Washington, if it's not funded, it's not real. It's an old saw, but it's true. I focus clients on helping to recognize where is the funding, what needs to happen for funding to be in place, are the policies correct that will allow for funding, and how can we help get this into the budget? When it's in the budget, then it's able to be acquired through an acquisition process. Brittany, I see a red light for the chat, but I don't have the chat up. If there's something there, please break in if it's appropriate.
It was just me reminding everyone that they could
Okay.
ask questions if they had any.
Okay, it's just my configuration. I've got the slides up.
Sorry.
No problem. So I use the term the three-ring Circus of Federal Sales. This is not a pejorative term. This is meant to evoke the concept of relative motion among three rings of influence: industry, agency, and Congress. If you think of a circus where there's a three-ring circus, there's a lot going on. And if you're, depending on what seat you're in, you may or may not be able to see the entire circus. But if you move yourself up in elevation, you can see more about what's going on. In terms of funding and budgeting, up in elevation translates to moving over to that left side, paying more attention to that budget that's in development and participating in that part of the process, to include communicating with Congress. Ideally, you can be at the center of this, where you're effectively communicating with industry, agency, and Congress over time, and you know how to do that at the right place and time. I'm not sure why it's jumping around on me. There we go. So now I got the wheel of death here. Hang on one second. I want to talk briefly about how you communicate. Why is that doing that? So I'm not touching anything now. The 8-minute rule of messaging. This is my surefire way to have a solid communication with anybody in government. If you stick to a concept that's referred to as a congressional white paper, that's a single sheet of paper. It has 4 parts: the issue, the background, how did we get here, the discussion, what are some of the options and why is your option the best, and a recommendation, how much funding needs to be put where in order to get a certain capability purchased in a certain amount of time. If you can speak to those 4 issues succinctly, when you have a 30-minute meeting scheduled, which is a typical meeting schedule in Washington, you'll walk in and you'll be able to command the room. You might have just a minute or 2 of chit chat, introductions. You're going to jump right to your issue, which is stated very clearly. The U.S. Air Force is failing at X. Here's how we got here. Here are some of the ideas that we have. Here's a solution we have, and here's a recommendation that will get us out of this. You can get your key points across in 8 of those 30 minutes, and you'll find that you have a comfortable amount of time for questions and follow-up. And the best part, you'll finish early, which means you give time back to that audience member. So think of the busy government executive or a congressional staffer or a member of Congress. When you can give them time back in their calendar, you're a hero. And because you go in with a plan and how you're going to tell this story in 8 minutes or less, you're differentiating yourself from many other people. I would say most all of the other people. I worked as a Navy detailee in Congress. I was in the office of Senator Thad Cochran. At the time, he was ranking member on appropriations. I watched hundreds of people come through the office asking for things, essentially with the tin cup out. Most people cannot communicate effectively in 8 minutes or less. They go in there and they go into sales mode and they want to tell everything they know. And that's just not the place to do that. Same thing happens in the Pentagon. You finally get your meeting with a 3-star general who oversees something, and then you're either wowed by the star power or you want to tell them everything you know and all the things that your company is capable of. You don't need to do that. It's wasted time. It makes you feel good, but it's not being effective. And so when you can distill your message down to just 8 minutes, you will differentiate yourself from the crowd. It's a highly effective tool. I use it across government. I practice with presidents of companies before we go into meetings to make sure that we have a rhythm down. It doesn't mean that you're so rigid in your memorized lines, so to speak, but you know what you need to say, and you know how mindful of the clock you need to be. And then if there's time for questions, there's time for questions. If you need to come back, you can come back. And ideally, you want to be able to come back. But if you go long, if you go 40 minutes for a 30-minute meeting or longer, you're not going to get invited back, because that person who took the meeting says, no, those guys weren't prepared, and I don't have time for that this week, or whenever you're asking for it. So 8-minute rule of messaging, highly effective. You can use it across government. I mentioned the 4 processes: budgeting, funding, acquisition, and contracting. If you can remember that these things are interrelated, one feeds into another. They don't happen on an exact timeline. The few exact points that are out there are the start and finish of a fiscal year. So 1 October to 30 September. The first Monday in February as a delivery date of a budget to Congress. Those are hard dates, but you see that they get slipped all the time. Hearings that occur in the legislative process are in constant flux due to all sorts of scheduling issues. The political dynamics of when legislation gets reviewed in committee or in a subcommittee or on the floor, or between the House and the Senate, or when the president decides that he's going to negotiate or not negotiate. Those vagaries cause disruption in the timelines such that they're not precise, but they do happen in a predictable sequence, and they do happen pretty much every year. Despite the headlines, we put on contract, we a government in DOD, for example, it's roughly $10 billion a week that goes on contract, just as an average. Even when things are slow, there's billions of dollars being put on contract. Things happen perpetually, and you just have to be participating in the process. Most companies don't have the time to follow this so closely, and so they kind of ignore it, and they stick to the part that they know, or they stick to the people that they know, and as a result, they miss out on key parts of the process that could be helping them. For companies of all sizes, I have this tool called the sales wheel. It's titled here, The Shape of the Sale. This is proprietary intellectual property that I developed. It's used by the Defense Acquisition University when they teach their government students about how industry looks at a sales cycle. There's several things that need to be in position here for a successful federal sale. We talked about a need. There has to be some operational issue that you're solving. You have to have a solution, something that gets at the need. The requirement has to be validated, meaning that a headquarters level team or people have said, yes, this is a valid requirement and should be considered for funding. Ultimately, it has to get funded. There have to be relationships among industry, agency, and Congress in order to influence some of these things. There has to be support that you are generating through those relationships. You have to demonstrate capacity to deliver on what you say you can deliver. And then there has to be a contract vehicle. That can be a sticking point for some. For those that are new to it and don't have contract vehicles, the easiest way in is to partner with another company, give up some small percentage so that you can be on their contract vehicle. You can be their sub, they can be the prime, or vice versa. There's different ways to get at that. That's sort of an art form of its own. But if you don't have these 8 things, you can't participate, or something's going to that whatever the missing thing is will keep you from participating. But the way to use this wheel across your entire team of R&D people, sales people, business development people, you may have government relations people. If you were to give yourself a grade on each of these 8 items, between 0 at the center and 10 at the outer ring, and if you just put a dot in each of the 8 pieces of the pie and then connect those dots, Do you have a small wheel? Do you have a large wheel? So a small wheel requires a lot of effort to cover an amount of terrain. A large wheel doesn't require a lot of effort, maybe one rotation to cover a lot of terrain. You may not even have a wheel when you connect the dots. You may have some other, I don't know what the geometric term is, but something that doesn't look like a wheel. That could mean that you are really good in some areas and not really good in other areas. But it can help the rest of the team see where there might be a shortcoming that needs to be addressed in order to have a successful sale. I told you I wasn't going to give you a checklist, and I don't think I gave you a step-by-step, here's how you do it, but I gave you some things to think about that fit into these overall strategies for excelling. And if you're not working at these with some zeal and some level of effort, you're probably missing out. Let's just go through them real quick. We're influencing multiple processes, right? Talked about budgeting, funding and legislation, acquisition, contracting, communicating expertly, not only talking to the right people at the right place and time, but using an effective tool like the 8-minute rule of messaging to convey your message quickly and efficiently. Understanding that you're making an investment when you learn how to do these things. Ideally, you can connect the investment required in time and resources to an outcome. You need to use your imagination to envision the outcome. If your funding seems to be stuck, it may be that there's a policy issue in place. A perfect example of a policy issue in today's world is the supply chains that have some sort of connection to China. We have many, many components that come from China, and Congress is trying to drop a hammer to say, we don't want that anymore. And so Congress legislates to an end state that they desire. They're saying no more, but there needs to be a period of transition where those supply chains can be requalified to use other sources. Sometimes it takes you or somebody else communicating that, hey, this policy is well intended, but it's in conflict and it won't serve the warfighter. We need a 2-year grace period. You can make that happen. I've made that happen multiple times using Congress, using the agency, and even using the White House staff to get a presidential decision directive issued. Depends on what the issue is and how complex it is, but you have access to all of these paths. There's no magic here, and it's not like you have to stroke a big check to contribute to whatever political party is in power. It doesn't work that way. We've talked about influencing relationships. It's not only enough to know people in certain places, but to understand what they can do for you and what you might be able to do for them that allows influence to be conveyed appropriately. When you look at this in sum, we're talking about expertise. It's not just time on station. It's understanding how to turn the wrench of the process so that certain parts of the cogs move in the direction that you need them to move to help connect you to your sales opportunity.
Hey, Gene.
Yes.
We have a question from Adam Fisher about building relationships in that context that you were just speaking of.
Okay. Can you read it to me, or Adam, do you want to ask?
Hi, Gene. Yeah, if I could just speak it.
Yeah.
Thanks. This is, by the way, this is really, really fascinating and valuable. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of interrelated questions. One is, you talk about figuring out who various influencers might be in different parts of the process. Do you have an approach or approaches in terms of how to research who you would want to talk to, given that, you know, this is like a vast apparatus, right? Do you have like a way of going about that, figuring out like who are the people to talk to in various stages, other than just randomly, you know, hearing from someone?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to dissect it. It always comes back to who owns the money. So it depends on what agency you're talking about. I speak to DOD regularly. What happens in the Navy is very different than what happens in the Air Force or Department of Homeland Security, as an example, the Coast Guard. You have to understand what is it. So let's just use an example. Ships, obviously that's Navy. there's an acquisition command, the Naval Sea Systems Command, that has program executive officers who oversee ships, and then program managers who oversee specific types of ships. And then there are decision makers who influence those program managers. In industry, there are industry associations specific to shipbuilding. And there's a lot of public information out there that people comment on or write about. And there might be political or not political, public writings of senior government leaders about shipbuilding that is published in defense journals. In Congress, there are 4 different committees, 2 in the House for authorizations. I said that wrong. 2 in the House, 1 for authorizations, 1 for appropriations, 2 in the Senate, 1 for authorizations, 1 for appropriations. Within each of those committees, there is a Republican and a Democrat staffer who oversee shipbuilding very specifically and very detailed. So it's, for me, I sort of look at it in those through those lenses. Who is it at the agency level? Is there a budget associated with it? Are there industry people that influence this world? Who in Congress oversees it? And then I can usually peel it back pretty readily. You have to start somewhere because it is a big elephant, right? But
yeah,
I can go more specific if you had a specific example.
Not at the moment, but what sounds like what you're saying is a lot of that is publicly available to sort of see.
It's amazing how much is publicly available. Now, this will sound obvious, perhaps, but LinkedIn is actually a very legitimate resource. Once you have some idea of what you're looking at, LinkedIn can be a resource. There are subscription services. I subscribe to Bloomberg Government. That is not an inexpensive subscription, but they maintain pretty good directories of who is positioned where. You may not feel like you want to make that investment. It can be helpful to have other people who are on call to you that you can call on to help speed that process along. But yeah, there's a lot in public. And similarly to the LinkedIn point, when you reach out to government, they're checking you out. So they're going to go to your website. They're going to go to your LinkedIn. They're going to know about you before they accept a meeting until the relationship is established. They want to know that you're who you say you are. And a lot of people miss that their public, their positioning in the public square is subject to that sort of scrutiny, but it's just human nature.
Absolutely. Can I ask a follow-up or two from that?
Sure. I just want to make sure, Brittany, I'm not seeing the chat, but it looks like there are others with questions. I want to make sure we go around here.
Sure.
But Adam, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yep.
2 other questions. One, in other contexts, I've always found it helpful to build the relationships before there's something that I need to ask someone for. So I know that you've been talking about this in a very focused way of like, okay, you have your problem you're solving, your solution, you're ready to tell someone when needed, in 8 minutes. What are your thoughts about cultivating those sorts of relationships with these various people well in advance of having something to present to them? Like, are they generally, do you find open to that, or is more like just jump in when you're ready to go?
Well, it doesn't all have to be so transactional as I'm describing here. We're certainly trying to get to a preferred outcome, but you have to start somewhere. But you want to be delivering some value. You don't want to just try to go meet people to say, "Hey, I'm getting into this line of work, and I'll come back in 3 years." That's not important to them. If you happen to see them or be seated with them at a lunch or a dinner, at an industry event, that's different. Right. But if you always think about how respectful are you being of that government audience's time, you will be repaid for that. If you waste their time, they remember that as well. It's right. It's just the human dynamic.
Well, I loved what you said about giving people back time. Like if they set aside a half an hour, that you're only taking 8 minutes, and then there's this space, because that sets such a great frame for the relationship ongoing, right? If that's how they feel about that interaction, and they'll.
I will tell you, I'm in the process right now of teeing up my fiscal 24 congressional meetings. We're in that window where I'm taking clients forward. We're setting up dates and times on Capitol Hill. I have a date set aside for each client. I bring them in from out of town. I'm reaching out to those staffs and saying, hey, we're going to have an FY24 issue. It's going to be on, let's just say DDG 51. I'm going to bring Joe into town. Can you see us at 11 o'clock? Usually within minutes, I get an answer back. Yes. I know that is not common, but I also know that it's because over time, I've established myself as somebody highly credible who comes in and goes out, and I don't waste their time.
Absolutely.
So it pays off.
Okay, I have one last quick one. If it's all right. Any thoughts about? You had mentioned that either you're sort of like unseating someone who's already making something, you're coming in with a better solution, right? A better wheel, or you're potentially coming in with something new. Is there any general difference in terms of breaking in, one being a better way to start in terms of just the ease of getting the process moving, or is this really just depends entirely on what it is you're offering?
It does depend on what you're offering. I will say no incumbent is going to leave without making some noise.
Yeah.
It boils down to educating that government customer on what it is.
Yeah.
It is just not a secret that facts will win the day. And if your facts can save money or deliver something more quickly or more efficiently, or save lives, those are things that get people's attention. And how much money do you have to be able to save? Well, often it's you're immediately in the millions when you're talking about defense. But if you can say that, hey, over the course of the year, this will be a proven savings of 10 million, 20 million, right. that is a number that they have to pay attention to. I know we can sometimes say that these big numbers are just pencil dust against an $850 billion defense budget, but that's really not the case when you get down to a program office level. And if you are able to demonstrate that to the government customer, if you're able to socialize that concept, maybe through a hearing question that gets asked about a particular capability, Admiral Jones, why are we spending this amount for whatever the widget is when this company over here clearly can do this for 30 million less? It's fair game to ask questions, have questions like that asked on your behalf, such that the dynamic begins to move. But it's rarely one conversation that's going to shift the playing field.
Right. And that's all. And then that's annualized, right? Once they make that improvement, project that over the next 10 years too, right? Not just a one-time thing.
Correct.
Thanks so much.
You bet.
Okay, Gene, we have a question from Joel. He says, how do you make friends with players inside the company who might see you and your specialized expertise as a threat? I find in dealing with corporations as an advisor in my field of law, internal legal executives can feel threatened by me coming in as an independent expert.
I'm not 100% sure that I'm following it, but if we're
clarify?
Yeah, please do.
Sorry, Gene, and you were very good to respond to my email earlier this week. The question is, when you're in terms of client acquisition or client retention, you made it clear that some of your clients don't have a government relations or other replication of what you provide. But many of them, I expect, do have people whose internal representation to the C-suite is, yeah, I'm the guy, the gal who knows Capitol Hill and the DOD and whatever. In my experience as an executive in corporate life, trying to bring in corporate outside experts, whether in law or some other fields like financing, I've experienced folks saying, we can do it ourselves internally, or what do we need this outside expert for, in terms of bringing them in, asking that as a consultant.
Yeah, well, I think that's going to be an ongoing issue, and it does depend on the personality. Sometimes it's ego in-house. Sometimes it's a little bit of fear in-house. Often it's presented as, hey, we don't have budget for that. To me, if that's the conversation, you're at the wrong level. You need to be talking to leadership. With respect to defense successes, being able to demonstrate some track record of, what have we done by using some of these different tactics, and what could you be missing out on? Sometimes you have to just come forward with some specific examples. Nothing will help more than a referral from a trusted source who has used your services before, or has some understanding of services. I'll use an example with me fairly recently. I've been working with a magnet company for a while. They do highly specialized magnets in the defense industry. They have introduced me to the CEO of the mining company where these rare earth metals come from that will be so critical to the electrification of automobiles. That's an international company. I would never have had access to them without that sort of direct referral from a trusted person within their supply chain, connecting me like that. But once in the door, then I can show, hey, these are things that other companies do that have allowed them to have much greater levels of success. It's not a secret. I help Austal USA. They're a shipbuilder, probably the 5th largest in the U.S. They're owned by an Australian company, Austal Limited. They came into the U.S. with the idea of building the Littoral Combat Ship. The Littoral Combat Ship was suffered from very bad design decisions that were made in collaboration with Navy and industry across a couple of different industry builders. The program got off to a terrible start. Congress hated it. It was the initial ships were costing too much money. Well, we got in there and changed the facts that were on the table, change the understanding of the facts that were on the table, such that the Navy couldn't just point at industry and say industry screwed this up. Industry came in with an orchestrated message in industry trade shows, in Congress, and in the Navy to say, here are some facts, and here's a way that we think we could work together to get through this to a better outcome, as opposed to just canceling the program, excuse me, and potentially costing the government billions of dollars. That program has continued on. All the intended ships have been put on contract, and it's a huge success story that was fundamentally about getting the right people onto the team to help deal with the different parts of the process for a very large program.
Thanks very much, Gene. I didn't mean to cut you off just now.
No.
I really appreciate the generosity of your answer.
Same concept applies down at the smaller scale, is all I was going to say.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
You bet. Brittany, any others?
Nope.
Okay,
Nothing.
I'm just gonna wrap up with the I think I have maybe 2 more slides here. See if I can get back into the right configuration. There we go. Some people ask how they can work with me. I've talked about funding and policy here. Those are key issues that companies typically have an issue with. They're either trying to get funding, or they keep losing out to other companies, or they don't recognize that there's a policy that's affecting them, or they know there's a policy that's affecting them. They have no idea how to change that. Some companies just want to have me on speed dial and talk about things as they go through the process. And I work with companies in any number of those ways. I am available to people in this call for an Ask Me Anything. We had some questions in the chat. If you want to send me an email at gene@capitalintegration.com, I'm happy to answer. On my website, there's a program called Capital Currency. If you're relatively new to this and you want to learn more and get a very quick introduction, I have a series of videos, or over 50 videos of me communicating like this, or communicating with government executives, congressional staff, examples of white papers, examples of the sorts of questions that you need to be able to answer when you're having these sort of government dynamics. It's a template that if you go through the template, you will not get surprised by questions that the government customer asks. They are so easy to predict, but so many companies that go it alone, they don't quite know how to wrap their arms around that. There are case studies in the program. It's a really quick way to sort of learn how it all works, and it's available to you. With that, you get lifetime access to my Big Top forum. That's an online forum that is like-minded people like us who are interested in the federal space and federal sales, and we try to answer questions live. And I'm available on there virtually every day. I post things there about things that are happening in the news. A lot of things get put out in the media that are not exactly as the headline reads. A lot of terminology gets confused. Today we're talking about the debt ceiling. We're talking about, are we going to pay for something that we already voted to fund? That's the conversation that's unfolding, but that's not how it gets presented necessarily. Unless you're really following this closely, many people just misunderstand that. So, will we change the debt ceiling? Yes. Will we have a challenging fiscal year or calendar year 23 as we prepare for 24? Yeah, there'll be challenges, but there've been challenges for the last 15 years. And guess what? The lights come on in government every day. Even when there's a shutdown, there are things happening. It's a crazy process, but it's a very addressable market. You just have to apply some specific skills to get at what you need. So let me stop there, and I can address any question. I've stunned them into silence.
Adam, did you want to ask your question, or do you want me
sure.
to?
No, I'll ask it.
Okay.
Would you apply the similar process to government contracts outside of defense? I mean, I know this has mainly been in the context of like the defense industry, but I imagine that it might be similar in almost any.
Yeah, I use defense as the example because it's the biggest part of the federal budget. By a factor of 10, it's the biggest spender. Next closest is Homeland Security, and then Veterans Affairs. But the processes are the same in any agency. It may not take 2 years to develop a budget within the Department of the Treasury or Department of Commerce, but the process of it going over to Capitol Hill for markup and evaluation, and then conversion into a authorization and appropriations bill, and then something moves over to acquisition, that is the same in every agency throughout government.
Yeah. Thanks.
Any others? Well, I appreciate you joining. We will send a recording out if anybody wants to look at that later. Some that could not be here today had asked for that. And I look forward to seeing you again next time.